Like we read from Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verses 1 to 6, there are a series of verses that strung together. It's almost like, they are bullets that are fired out of a gun. As you all know, Ecclesiastes is one of the toughest books of the Bible, very profoundly philosophical. They have abstract truths without practical import or application to us. But I engage with that book because while the authorship of that book is unknown or it is not established, many people almost attribute it to King Solomon because of the style of writing and the historical context in which it was placed, the metaphors that were used, and so on and so forth. And there's a high probability that it is written by King Solomon. So if you look at the whole metaphor of cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. And then he goes on to talk about how we don't look at the clouds, and we don't look at the seasons, we don't look at the weather in order to invest. Basically he's leading up to a wonderful setup, and which actually culminates towards the end of the chapter. But I want to pick up as a metaphor for today what is called casting your bread upon the waters. In Telugu, it's actually even more powerful. It says, "Ni aharamu nilla mida veyumu, chala dinamula tarvata adi kanabadunu." It's a metaphor that almost contradicts itself. Anytime I leave any food in a plate and I try to wash it away, my mother would just get furious and say, "Do you know how hard it is to earn food? Do you know how can you waste food when we know what hunger means? There are so many other children who cannot eat, right?" So if you grew up in a middle class family like I did, if you grew up in a family where food and bread and some of these things were considered precious commodities, you never throw away food, you never throw away bread. But yet there is almost like a contradictory principle that is emerging from the book of Ecclesiastes. What the preacher is saying there is the principle where he's saying, take the thing that is most valuable to you and set it free, let it out, and you will find it after many days. This principle that it's almost like a secular principle. In a very famous Hollywood movie, a quote about love is said where it says, "If you truly love someone, set it free. If it comes back to you, it is meant to be yours. If it doesn't, it was never meant to be yours." Almost sounds like a fatalistic, karmic kind of a thinking. If it meant for you, it'll happen. If it doesn't, it's not. But the Ecclesiastes theory of casting your bread upon the waters is not that. He is talking about a profound principle that we as Christians need to embrace into our life and say, I want to cast my bread upon the waters. Bread is a metaphor for anything that is most precious to you. Do you know, during COVID, many human behaviors were witnessed. There was shortage of medicines. There was shortage of essential supplies. But like if every country had its problem, in the US, the biggest precious commodity was toilet paper. So if in that context we use that, it says, throw your toilet paper on the water, it comes back to you after many seasons. The valuable resource that you hold most is food, because it is so fundamental to your survival. And if you can take what is fundamental to your survival and cast it away into the waters, it goes away. Watch the metaphor. It's not saying take your bread and invest it and plow into the earth. It's not talking about farming. It's not talking about putting it as a seed for future growth. That is a natural principle of farming. When you put something into the ground, it's by the laws of nature, it'll come back to fruition. If you take some food like any fruits or seeds or something, you put it into the ground, you know for sure it is coming. But here the principle that is being driven is you throw something into the waters. In other words, you're giving it away. In other words, you're recklessly throwing it away. In other words, you're doing something where you know for certain the outcome is not predicted. So I want to ask you, if you had some resources today, if your life is considered to be bread, if your life, the time is considered to be the most precious thing, and you have to cast it, what does it mean to cast it? And I want to share some biblical examples as to who gave their lives recklessly into this principle, and what does the Bible say about those lives. So I want to, before I get into the first character I want to explore in the Bible, I want to share about a great storyteller called Larry King. Larry King served on CNN as one of the prime time interviewers. In fact, he interviewed more celebrities on planet Earth than anybody else. Larry King was the father of interviewing. When he retired, when he just retired from CNN, by then he had interviewed the maximum number of presidents, prime ministers, Hollywood actors, sports people. There wasn't a celebrity that Larry King had not interviewed. So on his 20th anniversary of interviewing people, another famous interviewer, a lady by the name Barbara Walters, interviewed Larry King and made him the interviewee. And so one of the questions they asked him was, "What are you scared of most?" And Larry King's answer was, "I'm scared of death. I'm scared of death." And then here is this man who had interviewed almost every rich and powerful and famous person. He said, "I'm scared of death." And then Barbara Walters had a follow-up question and said, do you believe in God?" And Larry King said, "Maybe, I don't know. I'd like to think of myself as an agnostic." If Larry King, who had seen everything that is there to be seen, is scared of death, then human beings, this generation of people who's just come through COVID, who's seen death from close quarters, I'm sure there is no one in this audience who has not had somebody sick, somebody hospitalized, or we lost somebody very dear to us in this last 24 months. If we've seen death from this close quarters, how much more it should put a new vision in our lives as to what we might consider our life and what is dear to us, and cast it on the waters. That, to me, my friends, is the challenge for today. What is the bread that you have that is holding you back from living a fearless, reckless, faith-based, daring life for Jesus Christ? Are you also covering with fear? Are you also crippled by all the things that the world holds dear, and then living it as if that on a few days that your faith gets you by, and on some days it's the world, the realities of the world that cripple your faith, and you live in fear? Today I want to challenge you to this particular angle of what does it therefore mean to live daring life. I mentioned about the accident a few minutes ago at the beginning. After July 18th, 2021, when we survived with just a hand injury, my wife and we made this conscious decision that we will redeem every subsequent year God would give us, or every month or every day that He would give us, which meant we would make some fundamental changes in our thinking. One of the first things that we started doing is, let's simplify life. I'm very fond of sports apparel. Like the t-shirts that you get after a marathon is a very special possession. You ran 26.2 miles, so the t-shirt that you wear is a proud medal or an honorable thing that you earned, right? So I've run many races, so I've actually accumulated a bunch of apparel, and it was so precious to me that I would literally, even if they are growing old, like some of them are now 10 years old or 11 years old, but they become such a precious part of me that I would almost like you'll have to extract it like a dentist would have to extract it out of my hands. Those those things had become precious, too precious for us. Then my wife and I, we talked about it and we said, everything that we have that is more than needed, let's start giving it away. We started giving away things. We started making space for everything because we did not want to be defined by our possessions, what we have, what we wear, what we think. Another area that I made a significant change is to become very bold in the way I would speak into other people's lives, both at work and at our church and in the ministry settings. Earlier, if I would be sitting in a meeting with my boss and my boss was obviously wrong and I would find it very delicate to correct him, these days I'm not. I am saying I have a different perspective. I'm not being rude or I'm not just confronting the boss or making him look bad, but I'm not afraid of speaking my mind. I'm not afraid of dropping those truth bombs because I believe life is too short to hold back when you should supposed to be speaking. So this reckless living comes from a few principles that the Bible very clearly talks about. And I want to showcase those in the lives that they were manifested in 2 or 3 lives. And then I'll conclude with a word of prayer. The first character I wanted to examine is hidden in 2 Kings chapter 5. Please turn your Bibles to 2 Kings chapter 5. And you would find that the story is very familiar. You all know it. You may have even heard sermons on 2 Kings chapter, and a commander called Naaman. Many of you would find it very familiar. So the whole story is about a prophet and his power and how the prophet is instrumental in bringing 2 kingdoms together for a miracle. Naaman was the commander in the army in the king of Syria, and Elisha is obviously from from the kingdom of Israel. Naaman has a sickness, and then a little slave girl is in the story. Now, if you look at slaves, if you look at the life of a slave girl, they are nothing but child laborers, right? In India, we know what child laborers are like. When you go into interiors of Telangana or you go into interiors of India, you will see small bundis where children are working. You will see small factories, children are working. So I don't have to paint a picture to you about what a child laborer looks like. So here was the slave girl who was completely sold into the kingdom of Syria, living and also she's like serving the Mrs. Naaman, so to speak, the wife of the commander. And look at the scale of influence of how this girl who decided to live a reckless life brought the story to pass. She speaks to his wife, the wife speaks to the commander goes to the king. In other words, this little slave girl actually ended up shaping the voice and the kingly affairs of that kingdom. I don't know if that is not reckless living or reckless speaking. What is? That little girl did not think this is beyond my pay grade. Anybody who's working in companies and offices, you know that there are some problems that are beyond your pay grade, right? And sometimes you just say, hey, I need to just solve this problem. Why we are doing this is beyond my pay grade. We stop to think about issues beyond what is our job role, beyond our sphere of influence. But this little slave girl who had no rights, no business speaking into the personal life of the commander, talked about a person called Elisha, prophet, whom she had known in her past life, whom she had faith that he serves the living God. That to me epitomizes what we should be thinking of about our faith. You know, we have all these great stories of deliverance from COVID. After this, our life has to change. We have to start thinking about, if life is so fragile, if life is so short-lived, how much more daring and how much more bold we should become in our proclamation of the gospel, in the living out of our calling, in pursuing what is godly life in our day-to-day business. I know what is going on in India. I'm watching, I'm reading, and I'm speaking to people all the time about how difficult Christian life is becoming. But this slave girl who did exactly what she did it in the middle of persecution, in the middle of being in captivity. If she could, in the middle of captivity, remember how God and live out our faith, I don't know what else do we need as barriers. Just like that, many years earlier, the whole story of Esther came to be where she said, I will go and transform the things that are affecting my people. So this little girl is actually a forerunner of the story of Esther in many ways. Reckless living is not just living for yourself, but for your community and for the God that called you and living out his purpose. You are not just a Christian. Don't ever get that idea that I am just one Christian family living in the apartment complex that I'm living in. You are a representative of Christ, the Almighty God, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and He placed you in that place that He placed you so that you recklessly live out His calling. Bold, fearless living is the order of today, my friends. The more persecution comes, the more difficult COVID like scenarios come, the more we need to expressly manifest our faith by just stepping out and living it out on a day to day basis. Speaking, so I talked to you about my accident. Every opportunity I got since then, both at work or in church or even in secular settings, I was able to use that accident as a conversation to tell about how God miraculously saved my life, and therefore I am now on fire for Him, just living out every day for Him. What the enemy could have meant for evil, God turned it around for good so that more and more people have to come to learn about the faith story. I met a Brahmin couple much after the accident, and those guys were openly saying, the God you believe in, the God you so faithfully pray, has protected you. To me, that's the greatest validation, because even though they may not have accepted Christ because of that accident and our miraculous thing, they now know that our God lives, our God delivers us from the jaws of death. So here is a story of a little girl who had nothing but yet was living out recklessly. I want to move to a couple of other um, examples as to what else could have happened when people stepped out in reckless faith. Please turn with me to John chapter 4 and another familiar character and a long evangelistic encounter with Jesus Christ. The Samaritan woman. The Samaritan woman everybody talks about how this is a classic template or a case study of evangelism. Jesus, how he used water as a metaphor to draw the conversation, and how he continued to develop that metaphor to break into the consciousness of the Samaritan woman and then draw her to. Everything is perfect. But the second part of that Samaritan woman's story is what I call reckless living. The moment she had this confrontation with Jesus Christ, and the moment she saw that this water of life that Jesus entered, and that her heart will start now becoming a fountain of the living waters himself, what is the first thing she did? She went and brought the whole village to her. And then, that's the ripple effect. And the moment she brought the whole village to her, the whole village started saying, we are now believing him, not because you told us, but we also believed you. We came, we heard Jesus Christ. Look at John chapter 4. You will be fascinated as to how one individual who recklessly decided to step out in faith can bring a whole town or an area into faith, into conversation with Jesus Christ. It's a fascinating expose of how one faithful, one obedient person. It's around verse 39. Many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the the woman's testimony. Now, the woman's testimony was a very dubious term. Initially, she lied to Jesus. But when Jesus exposed her and he said, no, no, the one you are living with is not your husband. You have had multiple husbands in the past. Then in verse 40 it says, so when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with him, and he stayed there 2 days. And many more believed because of his word. They said to the woman, it is no longer because of what you said what we believe, for we have heard ourselves and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world. Again, a case of somebody who's willing to shed their baggages of the past and daringly, fearlessly step out and say, I will want to make my time count. So, what does reckless living mean? The first element of whether it is in the story of Naaman, the little girl, or the story of Esther, or even in the Samaritan woman, is a clear commitment to a purpose. Every individual should have a purpose. Every couple should have a purpose. Every family should have a purpose. And that purpose is nothing but to glorify God. If I go on to KBC Church website, the English website, there is a clear definition of purpose that let's not give up meeting one another. There is a verse that talks about your faith belief. There's a call that says, as a community of believers, this is what we intend doing. That is the purpose. I want to ask you, what is your purpose today as an individual? Is it to be a good corporate executive, to be a good businessman, to be a good professional, to be a good something? Or is it to be a good mother, a good spouse? These are all the roles we play. But connecting all those roles is one word called purpose. What is your purpose? My purpose is to glorify God in everything I do, both at my work and my ministry. There will never be an opportunity where I will let go, where I will not grab an opportunity to glorify God. That to me is my purpose. And so I want to ask you, what does reckless living mean for you? It starts with that purpose. That slave girl had a purpose, and she did not shrink back from that purpose. The Samaritan woman immediately discovered her purpose upon conversion, and then she went on to build the whole town for Jesus Christ. Now, every time you come into a successful biblical character, you will find that many of these guys had explicit purpose. I came to faith in my young days through the story of Daniel. And in the very first chapter of Daniel, verse 8, very first chapter of Daniel, he says, Daniel purposed himself that he will not be defiled by the king's food and the drinks offered. You know why Daniel purposed himself? Because in the Babylonian kingdom, in that kingdom, all the food given to the king is first offered to idols and then they eat it. And here was Daniel who said, he believes in Yahweh. He will not have any other idol before God. He says, no, I will not eat that food. That to me is daring, fearless, reckless living. And then Daniel and his friends make this negotiation, a treaty with the food makers and the chefs and the royal banquet people. And then they plead with them to give them the food that is not offered. And then they even take the test. We all know the story. That's what reckless living does. You are aligned so strongly to a purpose that you will say, I will just live on purpose, no matter what distractions come, no matter what troubles come, no matter what sicknesses come, no matter what adverse times come, I will still live on purpose. That to me is purpose. William Booth, one of the founders of Salvation Army, he was so passionate and he was so moved that he wanted to make impact in England. He coined the famous 3 S's. In the middle of the poverty and the plague and the difficult situation, he said, I will go out into the streets of London, I will give soap, I will give soup, and I will bring salvation, a message of salvation to the people around them. William Booth's purpose was around those three S's. What's your purpose? It's we need a word called purpose in our lives. If you don't, then we'll be drifting upon the waters. You cast your bread upon the waters. You let go of what you think without thinking of paying the price. Let me quickly move to the second part, which is in addition to the purpose, reckless livers, reckless people want to also think of the price that we pay. If Christian walk was easy, almost everybody would be on fire. The reason many of us kind of come to a plateau, come to a sort of a stagnation stage in our lives is because after a while the price starts becoming difficult. If you look at Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, there is a price to be paid for reckless living. Matthew chapter 16, verse 24. This also is repeated in Luke 14:25, but the sentiment or the message is the same. He says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses my life for my sake will find it. And then it continues and asks this greatest question ever asked: for what shall profiteth a man if he gains his whole world and loses his own soul? There is a price you pay for being a Christian. Dear brother Pramod and I, we often exchange conversations on some of the corporate struggles that we face. We are some of the. If you are not facing persecution, then you've either compromised or your faith is so weak that you're not making an impact. People should be rattled by some of the stuff that you believe in and you're living out. If you're not, then you made peace with them. If you're not singled out, if your promotions are not being stopped, if you're not facing adversity, then everything's coming too easy, then you really need to re-question it. Because I think you're already playing that game. What I'm not against material prosperity. I'm not against success. I, in fact, pursue success because we, as good stewards, need to do extreme justice to our potential, our gifts that God has given, so that He can be glorified through our work. Don't get me wrong. But if you're not shaking up people around you, then you're not paying the price. And if you are occasionally paying the price, be assured that you're probably being singled out for your faith. One of the biggest struggles for me has been how to cope with disappointments when promotions didn't come at the right time. In fact, there was a situation in my work back in India when I was serving a very upcoming company. I fulfilled all the criteria needed for promotion. My HR would come to me and said, hey, we are recommending your name. It's going to your boss. And for 3 years in a row, the boss said, no, no, no. And I finally got frustrated with God and I said, God, if I didn't fulfill the criteria, I can at least understand that my time is not yet come. But if HR feels that I'm ready to be promoted, why is my boss blocking my promotion? Something strange happened. God has a sense of humor. Just around the time I was getting ready for the promotion, it's as if God engineered a series of circumstances that the person who was blocking my promotion left the company. And his boss, who was supervising me for the time being, immediately cleared the promotion, and that year I was promoted. And this boss who blocked my promotion, who went out for some short-term gig somewhere else, which burnt very badly, ended up coming back, and he became my peer. And it's as if God took that guy out from the company only so my promotion could be cleared up and I could go. So there are times when you feel that you are being unfairly withheld. There might be challenges in your work situation. There might be persecution because of your colleagues or of people in power in your company or whatever. Fear not. If you are willing to pay the price for being this, it was very clear where it says, what shall profit the man if he gains the whole world and and forfeits his own soul. Guard your soul, because that's the ultimate prize for your life's quest or journey. The story is told of a boy called Conrad Reek in a state of Denver. He found a 16-pound rock in his backyard. He didn't know what to do. So for many days, they used that rock as a door stopper outside their door. Anytime they opened their door, they needed a rock, so they put it there. One day, his uncle was visiting, and he looked at that rock and he said, "Hey, this has a very unique shine to it. Can we go and check it out?" And they went to the goldsmith. This happened in the year 1799, so just around the 18th century. So they went to a goldsmith or a person who's an expert in gems and stones, and they asked them, "What is that 16-pound rock which they've been using as a door stopper?" The goldsmith and that expert looked at it with the lens and the whatever instruments they use, and they discovered that it was a rock that was nothing but gold. And this apparently spurred what is called the famous gold rush, and where people discovered that in that area of Denver there's a whole lot of gold to be dug. What was a door stopper was actually an extremely valuable commodity of gold, which they've instantly become very wealthy. Our life is like that. If you look at your life and you compromise and you start doing things around the world, just living life one day at a time, and then doing the things around the world, then you are settling for something far less than the extravagant calling that God has called you, where he's saying, instead of the rock, I want to give you the city of gold that we are so looking forward to in the book of Revelation. And in that light, if we start living, our perspectives will change, because you don't care about any of these earthly attractions, earthly concessions. So what does it mean, therefore, to keep thinking about the prize now? I want to talk to you about the third element, which is the prize, and draw this to a conclusion. There is a very famous story of a man called John Chrysostom. The name Chrysostom is a Greek name. The Greek name Chrysostom means silver-tongued. John Chrysostom is one of the most extraordinary public speakers that the world has ever seen in the early church history. When he stood up to speak in ancient Greece, there would be rapt attention in his audiences. He was like a silver-tongued orator. And when he spoke about his faith, people would be moved to tears. He started speaking about holiness, right and wrong. And in ancient Greece, where hedonism and a pleasure-oriented society, where eat, drink, and be merry culture was there, it started pricking the consciousness of people. So much so that the emperor's wife, her name is Euodia, she condemned John Chrysostom to exile, meaning he was to be banished, he was to be boycotted and sent out of the country. He then daringly tells, "What exile are you talking about? This world is not my home. You can send me out of this country, but you cannot send me out of the world. And even if you send me out of the world, I have nothing to worry. My soul will rejoice because it will meet its maker." What will you be anxious about? If he could stand in front of an emperor's wife and say, "I am not worried about this earthly punishments or exiles or what you want to keep me for. You can silence me, but you cannot silence my soul," was what he told the emperors and the ruling people of that time. As we focus on the prize ahead of us, nothing, no trouble seems insurmountable for us. Reckless living means a few things. I'll just talk about one or two and then draw this to a close. The first thing is having no other idol, just worshiping God without any other idol. In today's world, the pursuit of pleasure, the pursuit of possessions, The pursuit of anything that is around me, self, is become very, very common. You look around you, you look at the world of entertainment. The world has come into our homes through the form of televisions and through screens and through our phones. One of the things that I try to work when I work with young people is I try to keep their phone away and see how long they can survive without holding on to their phones. And it's like their pacemaker. If I take it away for more than a minute or two, they'll start getting all fidgety. Earlier, it used to be distractions on big screens and stuff. No, today, those big screens have all converged into a pocket temptation called the phone, and then it is right within us. And people just can't live without their phones because it's become such an integral part of them because they're scared of missing out. The FOMO factor is kicking in, fear of missing out. But if you really get to the deep, it is not, won't you say it has become an idol for us? Anything that takes the place of God is an idol. Wouldn't you agree? So in that sense, these phones have become our idols, no? Maybe you're using it for work. Maybe you have every legitimate reason to use it. But if anything has taken the adoration and the attention and the focus that you ought to be giving to God, then that's become an idol. In fact, Netflix, people start talking about binge watching, right? The word binge watching, binge is actually a negative word which was only confined to alcoholics in the past. They used to refer to some drinkers as binge drinkers because they kept drinking incessantly and had multiple side effects that they would throw up and they'd be out of control. And now suddenly the word binge has become very popular and totally cool, totally acceptable, and it's become an acceptable parlance in society that you are binge watching something. Beware. Your hours, your days, your time is God's gift to you, and if you are reckless about that time, then you will have to be accountable to God. If you want to truly be reckless about faith, then you got to harvest all those hours and say, no, I would rather use those hours to get direct with God and just love being in his community, in communion with him, and enjoy it rather than just binge watching. In fact, sometimes people watch it so much that Netflix itself gets doubt whether they are watching, and so they ask the question, are you still watching? I recently did a youth Sunday in another state, and I actually entitled that sermon, Are You Still Watching? Which means even Netflix is beginning to think that, oh, these guys have hit the limit. Maybe they just turned it on and walked out of the room. Netflix is thinking, or are those people dead, or did they go into coma, or did they go unconscious? I mean, that's I'm exaggerating, but that's how much you've wasted that time in pursuit of pleasure. If you want to be truly reckless in faith, you harvest your time and say, God, my time is yours as a gift, and I cannot fritter it away on useless, mindless things just because I'm scared of missing out what others around me are talking about. Entertainment can become your idol. You shall not have an entertainment idol. You cannot pursue materialism as an end in itself. Possessions become an idol. In fact, John Calvin, the theologian, said, the human heart is an idol's factory. It manufactures idols. And if you're not careful, and if you're not conscious, those idols can take away God's place in this daring journey that I'm encouraging you to be. So I want to conclude by just talking about how do we therefore have this reckless living. And it comes from a complete focus on what is the real treasure. The Gospel of Matthew talks about, in Matthew chapter 6, talks about where your treasure is, there your heart is. So I want to ask you, how can you therefore live a reckless life is just by focusing on what is your true treasure. Coming to church, absolutely important. Being in fellowships, absolutely important. Being in small groups, absolutely important. But these are all words. The true sense of worship, the true sense of communion happens alone with God, which means you have to cut away from all these distractions and get to the where the true treasure is, where your heart is. And if any of these distractions are coming in, then they take away from the true treasure that you are pursuing. In fact, the greatest trade-off is, are you pursuing the thing that matters, or are you pursuing the things that don't really matter in the ultimate analysis? And in that story of Mary and Martha and Jesus comes through very powerfully. And Martha is doing all these things around the house, hospitality, serving guests, doing all these things. But Mary is at the feet of Jesus, and Jesus says she chose the thing that matters. And so, dear KBC family, today I want to ask you, what is it that you are chasing in your life today that could potentially become an idol and keep you from this reckless, daring faith journey that you can embark upon? We saw these three stories, but I want to give you, in conclusion, the ultimate reckless person that has walked the planet Earth. And his name is John the Baptist. And if you look at John, Matthew, and also in John, you will see the parallels between how Jesus was really moved. In fact, I want to conclude with this part. The feeding of the 5,000 happened in Matthew chapter 15 and 16, and the actual events leading up to it, you must realize, happened around the beheading of John. And then when the news heard, no, Jesus was so moved, and he moved to a solitary place. And all the disciples were just stunned by what happened. And then he talks about how he is the most blessed among all men who was born to a woman. The greatest tribute anybody could get, Jesus offered to him. Because when he was about to baptize, he said, "No, no, I'm not worthy of baptizing you." But Jesus says, "No, no, let it be done according to what is written." The most humble, the most daring, the most reckless person who lived on the face of this earth, dressed differently, lived alone in the wilderness, ate locusts and wild honey. As I was preparing, I was thinking about locusts and wild honey, and I said, today the world is talking about organic food. Amazon has a store called Whole Foods, which is completely organic. John the Baptist was the original organic food hero. Wild honey and wild locusts, he ate locusts and honey. And for someone to be this voice in the wilderness, speaking after the 400 years of silence and saying, prepare the way for the Lord. And he lived this absolutely bold life, reckless life on mission. And then he paid the price. He paid the ultimate price, because King Herod thought John the Baptist is becoming so popular that he might actually engineer a coup, or he might create a revolution, and then he kills him, and then he pays the ultimate price. And Jesus, his cousin, in his earthly form, says, "Blessed is he among all men who was ever born to a woman." Of course, he himself was born to a virgin, so he's excluding himself, but that's the kind of a commendation or endorsement that John the Baptist got because of his reckless, daring, and bold faith. Are you willing to pay the price? Are you willing to live on a purpose? And are you willing or waiting to receive the prize? I hope that these thoughts would stir you as you keep thinking about, what does it therefore mean to follow Jesus Christ in this day and age in India, in the changing circumstances, under economic circumstances are changing, the health of people around us is changing. How does it manifest? How does that reckless living or daring living happen in this midst? I hope this provokes some of your thinking today, and you'll reflect on all these examples, and particularly the life of John the Baptist, who was willing to pay the ultimate price, including becoming a martyr for the faith that he had in Jesus Christ. I hope that stirs us into a new revival today, my friends. My prayer today is, as we draw this to a close, that KBC will spark and spawn a new breed of believers who will just go into new levels in the coming year. May this year be a year of rich blessing for all of you.